So here is my project so far. Got all of the machine embroidery, bobbin work done. I've got my little squares basted down onto the top portion of my fabric. And as what I want you to notice is that what I did with these is that I went ahead and I top stitched them down using just the thread that I had in my machine. I would probably recommend actually that you would do this, if you're going to do this technique like I did mine, that you would use a matching color thread just to avoid any possibilities of that thread showing through on your bobbin work. So remember that we're going to be sewing on this back side of our project, and so this is what the back side of mine looks like here. And my plan is that I'm going to be following with the decorative stitch that I've chosen, just slightly overlapped on this line. Okay, I do want it to be a little bit toward the inside because as you can see here, my top stitching is quite close to the edge of my fabric. So I'm just going to try to keep that in mind as I'm stitching along with my decorative stitch. And this is just a view of what the back side looks like so far. So in case you're wondering about all of this quilting that you see on here, what I did with my fabric is I just pieced these two pieces together, the beige color along with some, this is sort of a off-white colored fabric, and I just channel quilted here using a triple stitch, and I lengthened my triple stitch up to a 4.0 in length, and I just channel quilted rows and rows and rows just using the presser foot, and I was using the AccuFeed open toe foot, and I just spaced those out according to the edge of the foot. And then I did a little machine stippling in here with the embroidery machine using the AccuFill program. I'll plug in a little video about how I figured out how much or how big the size of that AccuFill needed to be for that stipple should you decide to do it. One thing I'm a little bit disappointed in is that I did choose that thread color. I thought I wanted to have a little bit of interest with the color of thread along the background. It's just a little bit too dark, but at any rate I think it's going to be interesting. So next that I'm going to do is go ahead and do some decorative stitching here, and I will demonstrate that for you also. So let's get that out of the way. You know, I went ahead and I referred back to my little stitch sampler that I had made years ago on a different machine just to kind of get a feel for what style of a stitch that I might want to use to border all of those little blocks. And I think the stitch that I've chosen is going to be in the quilt mode. Let's see if I can get this over there. Oh, I'm going to have to turn the camera this direction. Yeah. So it's the quilt mode, and it is stitch number 34. So I'm hoping that that shows up on the camera fairly well. I did go ahead and I adjusted the spacing on that down to about a, minimize the width down to a 7.3, and I left the stitch length at the 5, and that was the maximum of it. Didn't want to risk going too short because I didn't want my bobbin work to get clumped up if it was a little bit too thick. So anyway, so you can see that I've got my fabric in position, and all I'm going to do is use the red dot on my F foot, and I'm just going to guide that dot along the line that I stitched here, and my bobbin thread is showing because it's gray, and I'm just going to sew along there. So what you want to do is get your starting point of your design and go ahead and lower your presser foot and pull up your bobbin thread. Let's see, let's hopefully that this comes up okay. And I don't know if my hands are going to be too much in the way of the camera. Hopefully they're not too bad. All right, and that's unfortunately is that we oftentimes end up pulling quite a bit of that bobbin thread up out of the way. And so remember that I was telling you that when you have your bobbin thread in here that we need to keep as short of a tail as possible so that we don't waste too much thread. And you know, the big problem is that because we've just dropped our bobbin into the bobbin case without running it through the tension discs, or even if you're using the blue dot bobbin case with the very loose tension, it's really easy when you're trying to pull up this bobbin thread for bobbin work that we just have an uncontrollable amount of thread coming out of that bobbin area, which causes a lot of waste, and or sometimes we just have pulled out so much thread that we end up wanting to start all over and rewinding our bobbin and trying it again. So I discovered a little trick actually that has helped me to help control how much of that thread is coming out of the bobbin area. So I'm putting my fabric back underneath here. This is the seam that I'm going to sew with some BobbinWork, and I'm holding on to my upper thread. I'm going to go ahead and, just like we've done before, lower my presser foot, lower my needle, and I'm going to then raise my needle to start pulling up that bobbin thread. As soon as I start to see it coming up out of the bobbin case, I'm going to go ahead and put my needle back down in the fabric, and I'm going to get something pokey, and from here you're going to be able to grab that tail of the thread that's coming up. All right, and hopefully this time it works. Anyway, what happens here is that way the pressure of the presser foot that's holding down on the fabric, you're going to be able to just pull up a tiny amount of the thread. Oh brother, see, I don't have a huge amount coming up that got wasted, and I'm going to be able to go ahead and commence with my sewing here. So that was just one of the tips that I wanted to share with you, because you know, that is the amount of bobbin thread coming up that I can live with. You know, more than that I wouldn't want to waste. And most of the time when I'm actually doing this, I haven't even pulled up that much thread. So I thought that was an important tip to share with you. Here we go, ready to sew. Machine sewing real fast. I'm just going to kind of keep it at a neutral speed, and let's just see how this goes. So it's kind of like doing an applique on the back side here. You know, of course, it's going to be a little bit of a surprise as to how this actually looks once we get it turned around. I think what I will do is I'll just finish up to this corner, and then I'll try to turn my fabric over and let's see what we can get here. All right, and turn my fabric around. Let's see if we can zoom in here and get a little feel for what happened. Let's see, can you see this? Let's zoom that over just a smidgen. I don't want to start all over again, but oh yeah, I like that. It's a nice bulky, quite loopy and decorative stitch there that's going on. Yeah, I like it. It's a little bit wide. Maybe I should have taken it down a little bit narrower than the 5, but you know, if I get this whole little block applique down and I'm not liking what I've got going on, I could always rip it out and start all over. But I think it's going to be just fine. Okay, anyway, that's it for how that part is going. As I get more of this done, I will be back and show you the completed applique. I'm just looking at my starts and my stops on my corners. And there's a couple of places where you might see that you've got some of your threads just kind of sticking out a little bit too loopy. This is a good example right over here where you can see that this has got a great big loop on it. So you know, when you have tied off and brought up your bobbin threads and all that at the beginning and at the end of all of your lines of stitching, you've got these thread tails that are going to be on the back side of your project. And so these are a good opportunity for you to use up some of this thread. You know, if the thread tail happens to be at the same point where you needed to do a little bit of repair work, go ahead and just thread up a needle and, you know, take it to that front side and maybe tack down some of those loose stitches if you need to, or, you know, just fill in little gaps or whatever might need to happen on here. So, you know, mine is completed up to this point. I do have a couple of places where stuff didn't match up or exactly here at the corners, but you know, this is a crafty sort of casual look, so I'm not going to fuss about that. I could probably go back in there with do a little bit more stitches. I think probably maybe I'll just go ahead and come back in and just do a couple of more maybe one repeat of the pattern right in this area just to close up that gap a little bit. But all in all, I'm pretty happy with it. I've threaded up another color of heavy weight thread, and I'm going to do another couple of rows of stitching with that in BobbinWork. I think I'll do it as BobbinWork. Haven't quite decided, but anyway, just to add in a little bit more color along that seam line there. So anyway, there that is for now, and hopefully the next time I'm back on screen, I'll have repaired that little spot successfully, as well as put some more BobbinWork on here. So here's my project so far, and I'm just going to go over a couple of different things that I've had to do with this project. Now it's really starting to look like a Christmas project, which was not my original intention at all. But what ended up happening actually was that after I did all of the bobbin work around the squares, and I got my bobbin work done here with that Superior So Sassy cotton looking thread, which is a polyester thread. I talked about that earlier when we were talking about supplies. I just started to feel like the entire project was a little bit dull and it needed some jazzing up. And so what I ended up doing was adding in these little white candle wicks. That was my first step because I felt like I needed something light on this side of the project to help to balance out all of the light colors that are on this side of the project. So I have a stitch that I composed in my digitizing program that's in my embroidery side of my machine. It's called a candle wick. And what I did is I just put this back into my magnetic hoop and I just stitched out little individual white candle wicks all over it to try to lighten up that section of the design. And I liked how that worked. But then I stood back and I looked at the project again and I thought, you know, it's still just a little bit dull. And so that's when I decided that I would add in these gold decorative stitches. Now, do you remember when I was talking about how gold or metallic threads in general sometimes are quite problematic? Anyway, because of that, I decided that I would do these gold metallic stitches as bobbin work. So I experimented with a couple of different things, and this is where I want to encourage all of you to always remember that you do need to play around with your stitches. You do need to play around with your machine settings and all kinds of things in order to get the results that we are looking to try to get on any given project. So it was a bobbin that was wound with this gold embroidery metallic thread. And my first step actually was to try to use the loose tension, the blue bobbin case for this, because I kind of thought maybe that way that gold metallic thread would just flow through there evenly and smoothly. And it was too loose. So then I backed off and I went to my regular red bobbin case and I did a couple of stitch experiments. So remembering I'm stitching on the wrong side of the fabric so that the gold metallic thread sits on the top side of my project. I used a gold colored, not metallic, but just a gold embroidery thread in my needle. This is the thread here. And combining this gold thread along with the gold metallic thread, I ended up having to raise my tension on my decorative stitches all the way up to the maximum of a tension of 10. Can you believe it? Because what I wanted to have happen on the back side of my fabric was I did not want, this is where I'm stitching. Remember, this is the stitching side and this is the bobbin work side. I didn't want to have any of my upper thread showing on my bobbin work side. All right, so remembering this, remember that with decorative stitches, when they're stitching in their normal tension, you are always going to have some of the upper thread showing on the back side of your stitches. Usually, if with a satin stitch like this here, you're going to have about 1/3 of that bobbin side of your project. About 1/3 of those stitches is going to be the upper thread that has been pulled to the back side of the project. So remembering that meant that I needed to tighten or plus my upper thread tension because I didn't want to have any of that upper thread showing on the bobbin side. I hope that makes sense to you. So I ended up, like I said, I had to put that tension all the way up to number 10, which is the maximum, in order for my decorative stitches here to come out just like I wanted them. So that is for you and for me to always remember that we do need to experiment with tensions and we need to experiment with stitch settings and all kinds of things. So this is the result that I got. I did 2 rows of that stitch combination. I'll show it to you on the machine screen. Let's see, let's go back up. So it's these 2 stitches and I hope that they're showing up fairly well here on the screen. Let's go on down so that everything shows up in black. So it's that little petal stitch, which is number 4. I'll show you the settings now for it. Actually, let's go up to that. So when it's red, that means that we're looking at the settings of that stitch. I narrowed it down to a 6 millimeter wide and a 0.30 for the stitch length. As you can see here, the tension, oh, actually I thought it was 10, but it's at 9.6. What do you know? 9.6 worked really well for that tension on that one. So then we look at the little star stitch here. I adjusted the width of that stitch to an 8.3, and I adjusted the stitch length of it down to a 0.30. Tension on this one is at a 10. So anyway, that was the stitch combination that I used to get these little gold stitches here that are on the dark side of my project. And I like the way that's turning out. Anyway, I think I had also mentioned to you before when I did that other little short video that I was going to have to fill in, I don't even remember which one of the points of these squares it is. I think it's probably this one here. I had to come back in there and just fill in with another little bit of that decorative stitch. And it turned out pretty good. You know, I'm pleased with it. I think I've done enough work on it now that I'm going to be able to go ahead and finish this out as a little cushion cover. And anyway, if I decide to embellish it anymore, I certainly will record that also as a little video. But other than that, the next time that you'll see this particular project probably will be when I have it all sewn together and have it stuffed with a pillow form. So anyway, I thought I better update you on all of that, and there we are with the project. Hey, look at this. It's so pretty when it's starting to get dark. You know, I've been working on this all afternoon, and I don't know if this is going to show up well with the lighting on my sewing machine, but anyway, it's really glittery and it's really pretty. So I'm happy with it.